Also looking forward to our next one in February. The topic will be selecting a new city manager. We'll talk a lot about emergencies and fires tonight. I'll talk just a moment to introduce folks. Our third panelist just texted me. He's Steve Madison, my colleague on the city council. He just left City Hall, so he'll be here shortly. He had legislative policy committee, which I think he chairs, so he couldn't very well leave that early. At any rate, the next one in February, that'll be February 17th. We're going to have our current city manager, Miguel Marquez, who we are very sad to lose after just about 3 years on the job. His dad died suddenly this year, leaving him with responsibility for taking care of his 93-year-old mother, who lives in Santa Ana and is in poor health and does not speak English and doesn't drive. So it's a lot of responsibility. Some of you have taken care of their parents, know that that's a lot of weight on your shoulder. The city manager, usually, if they're doing a good job, you don't hear about them. Right? It's when you hear about the city manager, they're being indicted or they being fired, or and yet it is the most important job in the city. And I say that with respect to my colleague and friend, the mayor, Victor Gordo. But as many of you know, serving on our city council is a part-time job, even for our mayor. And it's the city manager who hires and fires all of our department heads, police chief, library director, finance director, in charge of the day-to-day management of the city. We are part-timers. Our responsibility is to oversee the city manager, the city attorney, and the city clerk. But it is the city manager on a day-to-day basis. Some of you know I was a city manager for 20 years, not here, but in other cities. So I have some understanding of how important that job is, and also how important it is that we select the right person. And so we're in that process now. You can actually go online and you can see the job description for what we're looking for. And next month, we'll be having a forum. And we'd like to hear some of your ideas and concerns and questions. So look forward to that on February 17th. So I know that Steve will be here shortly, but let me introduce our first two panelists. But first, let me say just a word about what we're going to be talking about tonight. We have heard so much in the last year, and especially in the recent anniversary, about the tragic Palisades and Eaton fires, how they compare to other tragic fires in Southern California history and California history. But nothing has touched our community like the Eaton fire. I don't know anyone who doesn't know someone who lost their home or who was displaced, and all of us, of course, suffered through no drink of water orders. Some people lost electric power. Many people could not go back to their home because of smoke damage and concern about safety. And of course, in our community, the losses were relatively light, but I emphasize relatively. In any other context, 117 people losing everything in Pasadena would be a catastrophe. And yet, compared to what happened in Altadena, it seems like barely comparable. Over 6,000 homes spread across the border in Altadena. Many of our friends, many of our neighbors, etc. So that's the context. And the three things we're going to talk about tonight with our panelists are: number one, what did we learn, not only from the tragic events of the windstorm and the fire and the immediate response, but what we learned over the last year about recovery? I think those lessons are really important, and it would be doubling the tragedy if we didn't learn those lessons. But more importantly than learning the lessons is applying the lessons. So we're going to talk about two things. What can government, City of Pasadena School District, County of Los Angeles, State of California. What can government learn from and do with what we've learned? Not only for the next fire, but earthquake or other unimaginable events that we haven't even thought of, but could happen. No one expects a school shooting there. No one expected airplanes to fly into skyscrapers in their city. No one of us expected a worldwide pandemic to affect every community in the United States. So it's sometimes the unexpected. But we also know that there will be an earthquake. Don't know when, don't know how severe, but we know there will be more earthquakes in Southern California because we have our faults here. And so the second thing we want to learn is how can we apply those lessons in government? But the third thing, and in many ways, the most important, is what can we do? What can you do in your home? What can you do with your neighbors? So we'll talk about those three topics. And to talk about those, I'm really excited to introduce three people who I think bring a lot to this discussion. So Joy Chen is internationally known author and business executive who's had a remarkable career internationally and lives here on Woodbury, just on the other side of the border in Altadena. She did not have her home burned, although significant smoke damage because fire was all around her. And as she will share with us, she just happened to be the person in charge of a little group of friends who played pickleball together at the Altadena Country Club. And they used something I think called Discord. I think it was Discord when you started, right?
It was a pickleball WhatsApp at the.
WhatsApp, excuse me. They went to Discord later. So they were using this just to schedule their pickleball games and exchange, friendly banter. And that has turned into the Eden Fire Survivors Network with literally thousands of people sharing stories, working to help each other, and frankly, taking on the insurance industry in the state of California. So that's one of the lessons we're going to talk about is what we learned about recovery, insurance, state law, etc. So Christian Miller is one of us, a District 2 resident, lives in historic Highlands with his wife, who's a nurse, and he is the battalion chief in our fire department, and he is in charge of training. So this has implications not only for the department to train for the next emergency, but also to partner with our community to train for the next emergency. And my colleague, Steve Madison, has been the vice mayor. He served on the city council since 1999. He represents District 6, which is the western part of our city, Linda Vista, San Rafael, the southern part of the city around Orange Grove, etc. A former U.S. attorney and distinguished lawyer now with the firm of Quinn Emanuel. He heads the Legislative Policy Committee. And the reason I asked him to join me tonight is because not only does his district have significant fire danger, but he has been very focused on this issue for many years. Talked about it, pressed for it, has pressed for successfully us putting more resources into our fire department before the fire, as well as after it. And so he and I serve together and we are friends. So we're going to start with one question, which is what have we learned from each of the panelists? As we always do, Megati, my district liaison, Megati Derbagosi in the back, who's a little under the weather. She'll be passing out index cards. If you have questions for the panel, I'm happy to try to work them into the discussion. But at the end of our panel discussion, we'll give you an opportunity to have the mic to ask questions or to make comments as long as it's short, so that we can learn from each other. Are we good? All right. Let me start with you, Mr. Madison, because when when the city was notified that evening of the fire, we had to mobilize our entire city government. So what are the lessons, both from the emergency and then later from the recovery, because you've been in touch with so many people in your district, what are the lessons that we should have learned from this firestorm and recovery?
Thank you, Rick, for the introduction and for
And
inviting.
you need to speak loudly because we're also on Zoom.
Okay, how's that? A little better. Thank you for the invitation and the introduction. It's great to be here. Delighted to be working with Rick on the city council. Brings quite a bit of added intelligence and dedication, energy to the city council, which is always sorely needed, and I'm grateful. So I feel presumptuous talking about, with this group, talking about the fires, but let me just share my perspective with you. And I always start with what we do here on January 1. On January 1, this town of about 145,000 residents has the attention of the entire world because of what we do here on New Year's Day. Parade, the game. It's sort of preposterous today to think about a city of our size having 100,000 seat, rounding up a little bit, football stadium. But the history of who we are is what we do here on New Year's Day, and we don't want to lose that. And I thought it was so poetic in a sense that last year, as you know, the tournament president each year chooses a theme for the parade and the game and the day, if you will, mainly the parade. But last year, the theme was best day ever. And like most New Year's days, it was the best. Million people watch in person, some hundreds of millions on TV, and the parade and the game, I submit, really evokes many of the things that are greatest about America. Service, community, civic and volunteerism. TVR is a volunteer organization, kids, education, sports, veterans, military, animals, art. I think some of the greatest things, and it's all against this backdrop of hope and renewal that we have on the new year. And then 6 days later, it was the worst day ever. And I was struck in the first instance by the rapidity of it. And, I've done tons of ride-alongs with both of our fire department and the police department. I was a prosecutor for 9 years. Pretty hard to shock. But a little before 7 that night, my son, who was driving to a hockey game at the Civic Auditorium hockey meet, texted me, and he had just arrived, and he said, "Dad, I think the fire's in Sierra Madre." And he texted me a photo. And I immediately said, "That's not Sierra Madre, that's Pasadena." And sure enough, that was the Eaton fire. And through the next 48 hours, we had 2 families staying with us that had been evacuated. We had many, many trees. One thing that's easy to forget is the windstorm would have been very much an emergency in and of itself in terms of the felled trees. And many of us remember the windstorms of 2011, where we lost 4,000 trees and a couple of lives, sadly. So this would have been a full-blown emergency even without the fire. But when the fire started, it really was like a Richter scale, to use the earthquake, in terms of being 10 and then 100 and 1,000 times more urgent. And I have 3 fire stations in my city council district. I'd love to take credit for that, but they were all there before I was elected. It's more about the topography and the geography of the city. I have all of West Pasadena and then a big swath that sticks out in the middle of Old Pasadena, the hospital, the convention center. So 31, 38, and 39 are in my district. We have 8 fire stations total in the city, 7 city council districts. So you figure each of us would get 1, and maybe the mayor might have 2. I guess he would no matter what. He has 8. But I've got 3 in my district, so I'm very close to the department. And immediately I was in touch with Chad And
But
there
our
are,
fire chief,
pardon,
Chad Augustine, that's our
our
fire chief.
police, fire chief, excuse me. And I think there are some lessons learned, but all told, I think you should be very proud of the way that our public safety personnel, principally fire, but also police, and even other agencies that don't think of themselves as public safety, like our transit bus drivers. I'm sure you know by now that they were driving up into the fire to help public safety rescue Altadena residents from those rest homes that were really, really in trouble. And at the end of the day, we had about 125 residences that were destroyed, some additional number of structures. No fatalities in Pasadena, and that's really just good fortune or divine intervention or both. Although I would argue that we were better prepared, sadly, than the county was. I think probably another whole evening to talk about the county, this entity that if it were a country, it would be Germany, be the 8th largest economy in the world. If it were a nation, if it were a state, it would be the 11th largest state in the country by population. And it is ruled, and I mean ruled, by 5 people, 5 supervisors who are the legislative branch, the executive branch, and for all intents and purposes, the quasi-judicial branch of government as well. And you know how the county operates. It is a very top-down organization. And so when we heard that the sheriff's department, for example, wasn't responding and getting out, like our cops and firefighters were warning people, you need to leave your home now. You have no time to take anything. Get out now. It's a matter of life or death. Rather, they were guarding the sheriff's station in Altadena when we heard that the notification system wasn't working. And I personally know dozens of people that were in Altadena and never received any notification. That's something should be done about that. I know there have been any number of investigations, but it seems to me like the people doing the investigations are the very people that were involved, and I'd like to see maybe more independence on it. But for our teams, I was very, very proud. And what we did, and never give a lawyer and a politician an open mic. I apologize, but I'll wrap up my intro really quick here. You know, what we did over the course of the next hours and days and a couple of weeks, there was nothing short of astonishing. At the Rose Bowl, with the team names still freshly painted on the field from that wonderful game where the ultimate national champions, Ohio State, defeated the Oregon Ducks, we set up a command center where in a matter of hours, really, we had 4,000 first responders, and we provided everything, food service, facilities. There were tents and bivouacs and all, and they were going out on 12-hour shifts and fighting the fire. At the convention center, because we had practiced through COVID, we set up a shelter for the newly unhoused residents of Pasadena and Altadena. Nobody cared. The fire didn't care about boundaries, nor did we. Where we had hundreds and hundreds and almost 1,000, as I understand it, the high water mark of people staying there and seeking shelter, food, all the things that one needs. So I do have some ideas about lessons learned and sort of goals and objectives that we should use this experience for. But let me stop, Rick. You've been more than generous with it.
Thank you, Steve. It's a good background, and one lesson, I think one overriding lesson is it pays to be prepared. That more lives would have been lost had there not been the training, the equipment, and the ability to respond quickly and collaboratively to what happened. There were definitely blind spots. There definitely were shortcomings. And we need to learn from both our successes and our shortcomings, because both have lessons. We need to do more of what led to success and fix the things where we had shortcomings. So, Christian, you were in the middle of all of this and still are. What do you think are the lessons that we should have learned not only from that day, but from everything that we've learned since.
Sure. Yeah. I wrote a few notes just so I don't want to miss too much, but I think I'm gonna probably dovetail on a lot of what Councilmember Madison said, because a lot of it is about relationships and how we are, where we are today. For example, over the last 5 or 7 years, the council's made a huge push to provide us with more great apparatus to run emergency calls. So we spent a ton of money. I don't have a dollar value, but we also had mechanics in place prior to the event where our reserve apparatus was ready to go. So when we did recall, we were able to put people immediately on those rigs. So I would build that starting with just relationships. And those relationships also move into like the Rose Bowl and the EOC meet staff. So Rose Bowl meeting, the second night, I was deployed to it after the first 36, 40 hours. And I was in incident command with LA County forestry feds trying to maintain the incident. And then because of the relationship there, we were able to move the entire command post to that facility. That being a staging area is just, it's so critical, just because to have a central place for everyone to come in and come out of is massive. Also, when you're evacuating individuals, having a place for them to go, the EOC was up and running prior to the incident occurring. And then like a third part is, and I know the residents specifically.
We always in government use acronyms. EOC, if it's a mystery to you, is the Emergency Operations Center, and that was activated because of the windstorm.
So having the EOC activated allowed the convention center to be activated, which allowed people to go somewhere. And like Councilman Madison said, is that no one was turned away. It didn't matter where you lived, you just had a place to go to. And I just think that all of that stuff sort of falls in line based on relationships. And then on top of that, we had recall procedures that allowed us to bring people back. We needed to make them a little bit better. That's something we've learned that it's got to be buttoned up a little bit. But we also, with the city though, we still have the Nixle, we have Please, we have Reverse 911, and we have door knockers. Those are all ways that the city of Pasadena has people evacuate from their home. And I think those all were in place and worked fairly well. And if they didn't, we were physically knocking on the door and telling them it's time to go. And then the last thing, and this is a bit unique to the fire department, is the fire department's only as good as it's staffed. And what I mean by that is, I don't know if you guys all know this, but we generally work 24-hour shifts. And when you work 24-hour shifts and you're not staffed well, you're forced to go overtime a lot. And forced overtime means that you can be working multiple days in a row. So when you have poor staffing, you at a lot of times have very tired firefighters. When you have good staffing, your firefighters have the ability to go home and rest. And we made a really big push over the last couple of years to maintain low numbers in our vacancies. So all those things add up to the ability to have people ready to come in and provide service.
So, Joy, I wanted you to be part of our discussion tonight because this is not just about Pasadena. And the lessons learned obviously don't apply exclusively to one side of Woodbury and not the other. We can learn from everything that happened across not only the Eaton fire, but also the Palisades fire. You didn't volunteer for this role, it kind of came to you. But what are the lessons that you've seen, not only personally, but also through these thousands of folks who you've been coordinating with and empowering?
Well, thank you especially Councilmember Cole for inviting me to join you. It's great to be on a panel with Councilmember Madison and also Steve. Mr. Miller, sorry. Yeah, this is this is unexpected, I think, for all of us. For me personally, as Rick said, I was the admin of the pickleball WhatsApp at the Altadena Country Club when all hell broke loose literally that night. From our perspective, just on the initial hours, what happened was somebody at 6:24 p.m. typed into our WhatsApp, "There's a fire on the mountain." And so immediately, as Rick said, our WhatsApp transformed from a place where we arranged games and smack talked and arranged, shared pickleball memes, to our emergency evacuation network. Because there was no evacuation network. There were no public evacuation alerts at the start of the fire. Later on through the night, so basically, we started triangulating where the fire was based on who could see it from their homes. And it was like, it's getting close to Jean's house, I'm calling Jean now, and it was just, it was literally, we're evacuating one another. And then we were our emergency fire brigade, because there were no firefighters in Altadena that night. And the fire burned for days. People's houses started caught fire on Thursday, and the fire started on Tuesday. So by Wednesday morning, the country club was gone, half our houses were gone. All of us were displaced. And this WhatsApp immediately pivoted. We started inviting all of our neighbors, everyone that we knew, and it became our hub for information at the beginning on where we could sleep that night. So none of the hotels were answering the phones, and so we were physically going to each of the hotels in Pasadena, finding there are no rooms. Somebody figured out that the Burbank Hilton had rooms, so everybody rushed over there. And that same spirit of shared strength has carried us through. So now we are over 10,000 survivors and allies across the Eaton and Palisades fire zones. On the insurance thing, what happened was when we busted past the WhatsApp limit of 1,000, we moved over to Discord, which is a mass messaging app. And we set up a separate channel for each insurance carrier. And around February, March, I noticed that whether a family was recovering or not depended largely on which insurance carrier they had. And this is in a world where these are all people who were paying their insurance premiums for 20 or 30 years. And it became really obvious that two entities seemed to have the most problems. But the first was State Farm and the other was Fairman. And at the same time, reading the news, it was obvious that State Farm was getting these billion-dollar rate hikes. And so we started collecting firsthand accounts of State Farm's misconduct, collected nearly 500 accounts, started presenting them in public, started asking our state insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, to enforce the laws against illegal delays and denials. So that went on for about 10 months. And then when they continued happening, the illegal delays and denials, I brought them to Supervisor Catherine Barger, who immediately in November initiated a major county investigation into State Farm. And within one day, State Farm started paying out claims that had been delayed. The next day, people suddenly started getting by FedEx checks for $200,000, $2 million from State Farm that had been illegally delayed from the very beginning. By now, we have unlocked over $100 million from State Farm alone, which is, a huge milestone in year one. But insurers still owe us tens of billions of dollars. I hosted a press conference on January 7th of this year on the 1-year anniversary of the fires, and amidst all the different events across the Eaton and Palisades fire zones, vigils and other extraordinary events organized by extraordinary community leaders. We hosted the only press conference, and so there's a ton of media there. And it was really up to us then to create the first draft of history for millions of Americans. And that's what we did. So I've done a lot of researching past fires across the state and thinking, well, what is the story that we're going to tell the world about these fires? And what we shared was that in year one, there is some recovery going on, but this recovery has taken a K-shape. And there's two groups of people who are recovering. The first group is people who had wealth before the fire. So if you had $3-4 million in stocks that you could unload, start rebuild your house, that's cool. Then you could be on the road to recovery. The other group were people who, like me, were lucky enough, the lucky few, where insurance paid out fairly and fully and timely. At this point, 70% of Eaton and Palisades fire survivors who have insurance are having delays and denials blocking their entire recovery. Think about that. What other consumer good or service do you have a 70% rate of non-fulfillment, of not getting what you paid for? Like, think about going to Starbucks and paying $7 and 70% of the time, you don't get what you paid for. That's what's happening with our insurance post these two fires. So there's three entities that each owe us tens of billions of dollars, each of whom we need to pay us what they owe us. The first is insurance. The second, on the Eaton side, is the for-profit electric company that started this fire, and that's Edison. Edison, fortunately, has this, well, we now have a wildfire fund, which will actually, that and supplements will cover the costs of this fire, but we need those payments to start flowing. And we've created a whole Edison urgent housing relief proposal, which we can talk about if you like. So there's two pots of money: insurance, Edison / wildfire fund, and then the third pot of money is the federal government. Each of those pots owes us tens of billions of dollars. Milken Institute just came out with a report. I think they said it was $163 billion is the cost of these two fires. So that's serious money. And if we don't get those three pots of money, this will remain a K-shaped recovery. And so what we need to do, we shared in this press conference, is that we all need to pull together, and we need to get the billions of dollars that are needed to fund this recovery. And if we don't, it will remain a K-shaped recovery. So that's what we're hoping to do, and that's what we're working on unlocking.
Here's what I heard from Christian about the power of relationships that pre-existed the emergency. They say that the best time to buy insurance, obviously, is before you have an emergency, right? It's a little late to buy it when your house is on fire. And relationships are a form of insurance. I think that's what we heard. That people knowing each other and how to work together before, whether through training, etc. I also heard the experience that Councilmember Madison talked about, the fact that we had been through COVID made us more prepared to immediately deploy. I think it was 20 minutes between the time the city manager called the Pasadena Center Operating Company, which operates our convention center, and said, we're going to need you to set up a shelter. I think it was 20 minutes later that they were opening the door for the first people to be able to enter. So that would not have happened if we hadn't had the test run of COVID. Obviously, insurance is central to this, and insurance comes in lots of different forms. And we'll talk more about all of that. I also heard capacity, the capacity we have in our systems. So the capacity for notification in the county clearly was lacking, right? It either hadn't been tested or wasn't up to the emergency. And so, on the other hand, unlike the LA City Fire Department, all of our engines were in good repair. I think what we've heard is that in LA City, a lot of the fire engines were in the yard because of recent cutbacks. They need people who repair those engines. And so those engines could not be deployed during the emergency. I also, I think, heard, this is not a word I heard, but I think this is a concept that I heard throughout all three, is systems, right? Do we have systems? It's great to have heroes, right? The person that rises to the occasion, Mr. Madison opening his home to two of his friends. That's the kind of thing we are always heartened to hear, that when emergencies happen, that people rise to the occasion. But what if our systems aren't there? And if we're talking about hundreds or thousands of people who are affected, we need more than individual heroes. And then finally, and this is, we'll talk a lot more about, is awareness. There are 20,000 people who live in District 2. There's about 50 people in the audience tonight, and not everyone is from District 2. So there's 19,950 people who are doing other things tonight, and God bless them. There's a lot of other things to do, and some of them, by the way, are online. But awareness is so easy to slip, right? This is a teachable moment. And if we let it slip, it'll quickly fade in the background, especially in this time when we are deluged with all kinds of information and distractions and crises. I'm not sure whether we've bombed Copenhagen yet tonight, but you never know. The reality is that we live in this community, and it's a fragile existence. That's what I think the most important lesson of January 7th was. We cannot take for granted that we are safe. I don't think any of those people who lost their homes, with the exception of a few right at the fire interface, a wildfire is never going to come down to Woodbury, right? That is never, ever going to happen. Electric wiring in my neighbor's house, which is old, might happen, but there's never going to be a firestorm that is going to wipe out half of my community. And so that awareness of our vulnerability, I think, is a lesson we need to learn. Steve, you previewed that you had some thoughts about things we can and should do. Want to share those now?
Sure. Yes, and I think I like your metaphor of analysis of systems. I'm a first wild golfer, and in golf, we talk about use the big muscles, because you may not have your best hand-eye coordination on any given day, but if you have systems in place, and I know we train our firefighters and others to have systems so that your training kicks in and you just go. And having said that, this was different in kind from what we normally deal with. Now, I must say, at any given time, every time you read about a wildfire in the state or the West Coast, Western United States, we have firefighters that are there. It's remarkable. They travel all over to help other departments, and we saw part of the reason why with these heat fires, because those 4,000 were not all Pasadena firefighters. What are we, 230?
I think 4,000 was the first wave. I think, Christian, the number was closer to 8,000 by the time we.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
And what that gets into, and you've seen this debate a little bit in LA about, do we have enough fire stations, enough firefighters, enough equipment? Obviously, the equipment needs to be well maintained and state of the art. But we really rely on these big catastrophes on mutual aid. The idea that all the departments will help one another. Quick anecdote, I have a cousin who's a longtime city council member in a small town in Oregon called Scappoose, about 45 minutes west of Portland. Obviously, we have a genetic defect in our family, somehow wants us to do these things, and they have 9 full-time firefighters in Scappoose, and 4 of them were at the Rose Bowl. And by the way, it had nothing to do with me or her. We both discovered this after the fact that they were down there, and I went down and sought them out. And I said, I just can't believe the generosity and the dedication to come down here. And they literally looked at me, and I know our guys and women would have said the same thing if the tables were turned. And they looked at me with true puzzling looks and said, sir, where do you think we went? Yeah, this is exactly what we signed up for. And so that's a big part of understanding how one student. Look, a reality check, we have such great modern fire prevention technology and systems, and we all do need to do, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, keep the brush back from the house and have the right kind of plannings. And make sure we're up to code in terms of everything, out of working a smoke alarm. But this kind of fire is way beyond, any of that. And so in those, I mean, I think our fire department, about 76% of the calls for service as a result of all the improvement with fire safety are for medical calls. So a lot, if you do a ride along with our fire department, you'll be responding to a lot of medical calls, traffic accidents, medical calls, and an occasional fire, house fires as well. But for something like this, we really have to rely on resources beyond. I do think there are two big things that we need to do a better job of here in Pasadena. And I might have said three a year ago, but we were able, and Rick supported this, and I was grateful, is we did not have a full complement of battalion chiefs like Chief Miller here. And now we have, the city council saw its way in a very tough budget sort of environment. We found our way clear to fund and fill the remaining battalion chief positions, so that now, as I understand, we have A, B, and C shifts, and we have 2 battalion chiefs on duty on every shift. That's just essential to effective response and fire. And the question of, is it big enough that we now need to call in mutual aid and other agencies? The two things I think we still need to do, with all gratitude to the school district, Jefferson, and to the neighborhood. We have a training center here that's, I think by anybody's measure, temporary. We need a full-time training center for our firefighters here in Pasadena. And the reason is very sort of prosaic. If they're training and they get a call, they need to be able to drop the training exercise if the situation warrants it. And we had been using a training center over in Glendale, which is, even that, as you all know, the difference of 4 or 5 minutes in terms of response time can mean life or death. So I'm really hoping that we're going to push hard in this next budget cycle, which is also challenging, probably more so, to do that. And also a fire headquarters. Right now, our fire department is headquartered in a commercial office building and office space. And I think, especially after what we saw on January 7th and thereafter, we need to have a municipal fire headquarters that doesn't just serve the needs of the department on a day-to-day basis, but also celebrates the remarkable dedication and work of our firefighters and by extension, all public safety. And I kind of like the Rose Bowl for that location, because what we proved in this episode was that the Rose Bowl is more than just an entertainment venue for sports and music and exercise if you're so inclined. It's a community asset. So I'm going to be working hard this coming budget cycle on those things. And it's no easy task, because times are very tough with this current administration and the other headwinds that we're facing. But if not now, when, after what happened last year, and if not Pasadena, who?
We have some folks on Zoom, and so if you have questions in the audience, maybe is passing out index cards. I will try to fit them into our discussion. And then if you're on Zoom, just drop it in the chat, and we'll try to do the same. You mentioned, Joy, and this is a sore spot, that there were no firefighters in Altadena. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but there were certainly not nearly enough.
Yeah.
Both on the night and even the next day, as the fire continued to spread, as you said. I went up with my daughters to check on 2 of our friends, and one house was completely gone and the other was consumed in fire when we got there. So we spent the afternoon putting out embers of the library, and we saw firefighters, and they stopped 2 or 3 times over the time we were there, because there's a fire hydrant right in front of the Altadena Library, and they wanted to help us because we were using buckets from the swimming pool next door. But the water wasn't running, and so there was no water because there was no electricity. to pump the water. So, what have you learned, Joy, about what happened and why it was so difficult to get adequate response in Altadena, recognizing the scale of the disaster?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that, I think there are a lot of people who are really angry because you don't know. There were firefighters, but they weren't putting out fires. In many cases, there are many, many people who said, hey, waving them down and they're like, either drive me by or there's nothing we can do, or, there's just a lot of people who either didn't see firefighters or they saw firefighters, but the firefighters were unable to help. So I think much of it was lack of water. But that was sort of, that kept on going Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. There were still homes burning. On Friday, which is really shocking. I worked full time in China from 2011 to 2020. And so I have a lot of friends in China, and I was just getting messages. People were aghast, like, how could this be happening in the richest country in the world? They just could not believe that they were seeing this on TV. They're like, yeah, maybe in some like remote outback village somewhere in the hinterlands, a third world country, or like our country, but not in the richest country in the world. It was just, it seemed unbelievable to them, and I think it still seems unbelievable to us to live through it. My house is in the area that got the last evacuation alerts in Altadena, which is 5:46 a.m. on Wednesday. Many people had died by then.
So the thing that keeps me up at night is an earthquake. Because what happened in the Palisades was that fire began first. And the LA County Fire Department, of course, because Malibu was one of those communities affected, and they were doing mutual aid for the city of Los Angeles in the Palisades, a tremendous amount of the county's resources shifted west after noon. So for 6 hours, they were moving as many apparatus as they could westward to fight the fire in the Palisades. 6 and 7 p.m. suddenly on the central west part of the county, there's a completely new firestorm, and it's kicking up. And so it was a huge challenge. What if we had the big one, and it wasn't just the Palisades and Altadena? It was all 88 cities in Los Angeles County having some level of damage, right? We know that it won't be the same spread throughout the entire county, but we would know that the scale of the devastation would dwarf what we experienced, even as horrific as it was on January 7th. So, Steve, you talked about mutual aid and how effective that is. But the reality is we're going to have to a lot fend for ourselves, just as so many people did in Altadena. They're not going to be able to count on the response that we would have hoped to have had in Altadena. We perhaps should have had in Altadena. It just won't be available. So how do we account for that? And how do we prepare for something that seems unimaginable? Thoughts?
Well, it's a subject that I also do sleep over, because in my district, we're not an island exactly, but we are separated by the Arroyo from, for example, Huntington Hospital, and you have to take a bridge to get from West Pasadena to Huntington. And if those bridges were to go, I think that's the big added variable with the seismic event, is it could have an even greater impact, not just on the region, as you described, Rick, but also on modes of transportation. You might not be able to get where you need to get to, and the first responders might not be able to get to you. So I do think preparation for one's own self is really important in that example, doing all the things that one can do to be prepared to have sufficient water and, you know, emergency, packs and the like. Not for weeks or months, but that you might need for a day or two if you find yourself without power, without aid, and not able to move around as easily.
Christian looked like you were leaning forward.
Yeah, I think that this is a really challenging question because, so in the city of Pasadena, we have 8 fire stations. We have approximately 53 firefighters on duty at a time. And that's to provide service for regular outcomes, regular calls for service. And when we get pushed, we do our best and, we're limited. So if we have, let's say, a 7 or 8.0 earthquake and its epicenter is close to here, then a lot of us are gonna have to rely on our relationship with our friends and our neighbors to help get through. And it's unfortunate, but that's the truth in the sense that I would say that I would hope everyone understands how to turn their electrical onto their home, where their water is located, where their gas is located, and also to have some water on standby and some food on standby. And I think a good rule of thumb is that you should be able to be standalone for a minimum of 72 hours. I think that the way the Mass Mutual aid in the state of California works is it takes probably somewhere between 8 to 12 hours to truly get a full force of people coming to you. However, if you do have something as large as an 8.0, you're gonna have a lot of issues. You're gonna have hospitals that are affected, you're gonna have airports that are affected, and they'll have trouble getting people to here, especially if we have our bridges affected. We've got one fire station on the other side of the bridge on both sides, we have 39s and 38s. There's 4 people at that engine company. There's a lot more than 5 or 6 homes in that area, so they'll have one fire for those areas. So I think preparation is really the key. I do know that we'll do everything in our power to get through it, and I do know that we have some things set up for asking for assistance from the north and from the south and from the east to help us. But there's going to be a high probability that you're going to need to depend on yourself and your neighbors and your friends for a little bit of time.
And 3 of our fire stations need seismic upgrading so that they can survive fires. We're not going to have the engines trapped in those fire stations because they sustain damage in the earthquake.
That's true. One of the main fire stations in our city that is probably the busiest engine company is Engine 33. It's at Lake and Villa. The completion of fire station 33 was in 1950. Fire stations are not, their lifespan is in 75 years, and we're rocking into that. So yeah, we definitely have some concerns with 32s as well and 37s. So we have challenges just like any other city, and we do have some challenges with our training. It's not uncommon for my division. I do run the training division. We are here at Jefferson, and we commonly have to go to Alhambra, Glendale, because they have training centers that meet the needs of a 2026 firefighter, and that's where we get our training because that facility doesn't exist here. But that doesn't mean that we can't get it done. So I'm kind of a little bit all over the place, but I do think that the concern for the earthquake is legitimate. We do live in an earthquake area, but I do think that we will persevere. I think we're strong, and I think that we have a dedicated city council, dedicated. Yeah, I mean, with these things need everybody. They need a power department, they need sanitation, they need parks. Parks help us when trees and limbs are off, like the wind event that we had. I mean, everyone's got to work together. So having a city that communicates well, leaders that aren't afraid to ask for help, and all that stuff works together.
And the impact on the insurance system of that scale. Councilman Madison made reference to a Richter scale, right? A 9 is 10 times worse than an 8. If we had an 8.0 earthquake in California, 10 times worse than a 7. What would you say this was on a scale of 1 to 10 statewide, and what would an earthquake be?
in terms of the impact on the insurance industry? Joy?
Who are you talking to? Me?
Yes.
You're our
the
insurance
impact-
expert.
The impact of an 8.0 earthquake. Yeah, it's hard to even fathom. I mean, if this one made it so that they're mass not paying claims of contracts that they have entered into over the last decades, then I don't know. I don't know how they would respond to a even bigger disaster.
Someone made more of a comment, I think, than a question. Do you support the firing or resignation of the insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara? Do you think that one person is the problem, or is it more systemic?
Well, right now we have two problems in California. One is we cannot be sure that we're able to buy or renew insurance. Ricardo Lara had put together a sustainable insurance strategy 2 years ago that he had said would enable us to be able to buy insurance. But the LA Times just did two huge stories that were really shocking and showed that in fact he'd set up some deals with the insurance companies that allowed them to get out of all of those obligations. And so we have a problem right now in the Eden fire recovery and the Palisades fire that we can be struggling so hard, fighting so hard to rebuild our homes, and there's absolutely no guarantee that we'll ever be able to buy insurance. And we're still getting mass unrenewed, so we've got two problems. One is we're not really able to buy insurance or feel confidence that we can buy insurance. And number two, if we're lucky enough to be buying insurance, then 70% of the time we're not getting access to the benefits that we've already paid for in full. Those all have gotten worse, much worse under his time in office, which is, he's coming to the end of his second term. So I guess I would just say that we sincerely hope that our next insurance commissioner, whenever that comes, will be someone who is honest, who isn't under all of these ethical investigations that our current one is, and who is dedicated to really creating an insurance system that does function, one that we can buy insurance, when we can renew our insurance, and then if the worst ever happens, a system that we can rely on to protect us.
So everyone in this room is eligible to vote on that, so pay attention
Yes.
between now and the June primary. There are 4 different questions raising this controversial issue of Zone 0. And Steve, I think you probably heard the most about that from your residents. Zone 0, as many of you know, is the idea that if you remove all of the vegetation from 5 feet around your home, that will make your home safer. Clearly, piling up wood next to your house doesn't make a lot of sense. Clearly, having a eucalyptus tree that hangs over your house doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But a lot of people are questioning Zone 0 as draconian and not science-based. What's your reaction? What are you telling your residents?
Well, again, I think in this catastrophe, I personally don't think that would have made any difference at all. I mean, it's hard to describe. And it's so tragic. Some of those souls who passed away in the fire were holding garden hoses. And I think when we all think about fire, Christian can speak way more eloquently than I can on this, but we think about fire like, don't put your hand in the fireplace, or oh, that flame is hot in the stove. But this kind of event is more like a 1500 degree environment, sucking up everything in its way and then moving to find more fuel and oxygen to keep going. I don't think we can even comprehend it really. So I'm not crazy about Zone 0, but I am crazy in a good way about listening to our fire department when they come out and do their inspections and they leave a note that you need to trim that tree back off in a more perhaps typical kind of a fire situation. For sure that would be real.
We have an angry comment from Zoom. D is saying, I think it's nonsense that no assistance came to us. Why do we pay taxes to be abandoned for richer communities like Malibu? People stood on top of their houses with hoses to put out fires. I think based on the fire company's lack of concern for us, we should pull all our money from you and train ourselves as well as buy water tanks. I think we all understand the anger, even if it isn't always well placed. There were 8,000 firefighters. I know the head of our union, Rafi, was worked 36 straight hours that night. And so a lot of homes were saved, amazingly, and lives were saved. But there's no question that we were not adequately prepared for the scale and the nature of what happened. And that's what tonight is about, is how do we get better prepared? We'll never have a perfect resilience, but we can do a much better job knowing our vulnerability. And I think Dee is right about one thing, which is a certain amount of self-reliance. That is not a criticism of our fire department. That is a reality that when you have 9,000 houses burning, 180 firefighters in Pasadena are not going to be adequate to it. Again, we had folks from all over the state and beyond, in Oregon, Arizona. But it takes them a while to drive from Oregon. They don't show up in 10 minutes to get down from Grants Pass. So this is where I'd like to end our panel discussion, is what you all can do. And that is not a dereliction of the responsibility of the public sector. We need to lead, and we need to empower, and we need to support you. But you and your neighbors are going to need to be able to be better prepared. I'm guessing that since you showed up tonight, you're probably more aware than some of your neighbors. But here is the key. It isn't so much what you can do on your own as what you can do with your neighbors. Pasadena used to have 90 active neighborhood associations. In addition to those 90 active neighborhood associations, our Pasadena Police Department had a number of neighborhood watches that were either connected or independent of those neighborhood associations. In addition, the fire department had trained many in what is called search training. Christian, what does CERT stand for? I'm not sure I remember that.
CERT, CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams.
Right. Imagine if Pasadena were crisscrossed. If your block, your neighborhood, you knew the phone numbers, the email addresses, the texts, the WhatsApp for all of your neighbors. That would mean that your disabled neighbor who's in a wheelchair, your elderly neighbor who is all by herself, your family next door with 4 kids and 2 dogs and 3 cats, that they would not be alone, and that someone would knock on their door before the police or the sheriffs or the fire department were able to get there. You could knock on their door, you could help them get out, and they could help you if you're in that same situation. That would be the most powerful thing we could do as a community. Now, here's the downside of that. You set one of those things up for an emergency, after a fire, after an earthquake, and about a year later, everybody goes, we don't have to worry about that anymore. We got other things to do. So there are 2 other things that provide the glue to keep that living. One is something as old-fashioned as just neighborhood block parties. I went to an ice cream social in a neighborhood in District 2. Just not relying on our willpower to keep going for years and years when nothing much is happening, but making sure that we are continuing to get to know our neighbors. And then there's also, sometimes there are issues that come up. Sometimes people want to talk to the city council because you're mad about this, that, or the other thing. So don't let that die out either. Now, there's a great model, happens to be my neighborhood, it's called Bungalow Heaven. It's one of the few, West Pasadena Residents Association is another, Linda Vista is another, but instead of 90 of these, there are like 6 or 7 that are really active now. So one thing each of you could do, if you haven't already, if you're not already part of it, is help organize your neighborhood. And me and Megati will help you help yourselves and your neighbors. We will help you set up a block party like that on Wilson Avenue. Joy will give you advice on how to set up a WhatsApp. And then you can play pickleball too. These are the kind of things, this may seem kind of corny, old fashioned. People still do that they still know their neighbors. It is not corny or old fashioned. It literally could be a lifeline. Many of those 19 people that died in Altadena simply died because no one knocked on their door and no one was there to help them. We could have saved many of those lives. And again, I'm sure Dee is pounding on her keyboard and saying, that's the job of the government, that's the job, what do we pay taxes for? It is our responsibility to do a better job. And that's why we're having this discussion tonight. But we cannot be prepared for every eventuality. And so having that self-defense, that resilience neighborhood. Do you think that's going to catch on in Altadena, Joy, as people come back?
We have something called the Altadena Neighborhood Captains Network that was set up after the fire. And I think that I would say it's patchwork. In some places it's happening, and other places it's not. And I think it has come down to individuals who've taken upon themselves to organize their neighbors. And so I think that when you are looking to have these kinds of nodes around, this is where one person can change the world. We have these 150 of them actually, neighborhood captains who stepped forward and said, I am going to take charge of tracking down all of the contact information for my neighbors. I think it's a little harder in Altadena just because so many people are displaced. 7 out of 10 people are displaced. So many of these people aren't physically here. And then it's just a matter of like literally writing postcards to your next door neighbor to see where the mail goes and trying to find them that way. But I think in Pasadena where, these neighborhoods are much more intact, it might be an easier lift to do. So I think it's a great idea.
Any thoughts on that, Steve? I know we used to have a fairly modest budget for a thing called Neighborhood Connections that helps people help themselves. A budget cut caused that to go away. Would that be when we're getting in a tough budget here, that we help spur people to organize in their neighborhoods?
Well, yeah, I don't know about that. I do know, as you said, and I'll echo it, that the council members are always more than happy, as are our public safety departments, to set up a meeting, set up a workshop, coffee, you name it. I would say also one of the mitigating factors here is social media that we now have, and so you can form communities, as Joy's probably doing, without having to, devote too much of your busy life to spending time with the neighbors. And one other just quick observation, I grew up in a time when pretty much all the kids went to public schools. And that was the glue that held us together one way or the other. The kids and the parents and the school was the hub. And of course, now that's not as true, perhaps. Kids go to school all over the place. And
many families don't have kids, or the kids have grown up.
Precisely, yeah. And but I did want to mention 2 other real quick things. One is particularly acute is the need for nursing home attention and senior living. I think this exposed that we weren't on our game as much maybe as we should have been. in terms of the county and the city of making sure that those facilities are prepared as they should be, have plans. And it was miraculous in some cases, some of those rescues. And then the other thing is we're looking at technology called, I think it's called Heat Spotter or Hot Spotter. It's akin to Shot Spotter, which I know is controversial for some. But the idea that technology could notify us before any 911 caller did, that there appeared to be some kind of conflagration that might be most useful in open areas like the Arroyo or the foothills, as opposed to just neighborhoods. But so we'll see in the next budget cycle if we run a pilot project about that. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
one comment on Zoom, and I certainly, I'm sympathetic. I'm getting the sense because this is a Pasadena meeting, they don't have specific answers for Altadena. That is correct. That is a huge lift. And we're not gonna have time tonight to take on all of that. And one lesson, which you alluded to, Mr. Madison, is Altadenans have loved their relatively rural and libertarian lifestyles of not having the responsibility of having a city government to have, you know, not as many streetlights, not as many sidewalks, and feel like in this vast LA megalopolis that's the size of Germany's, you know, economy, that they could live a little bit with less government, and that turned out to be not necessarily such a great bet. That is not to say that Pasadena wants to annex them or that they should become a city themselves, but it does say that a county of 10 million people now has responsibility for a community of 40,000 people, and it's difficult to spread those resources adequately to that community that has been so devastated. One last thing, and then we're going to turn it to you for your questions and comments. Actually, two quick things. Did Pasadena Water lose water pressure in Northeast Pasadena and Upper Hastings Ranch? I don't believe so, although our water tank in Hastings Ranch was damaged by the fire. It's right up. You put your water tank at the highest point, so the water flows down. And so it was right up against the wildlife interfaces, they say. But we were able to keep water flowing there. That was not the problem. It was really topography where we lost so many homes in Upper Hastings Ranch. And of course, that's where the fire started, the Eden Canyon, and that's the closest part of Pasadena to the start of the fire. And then, of course, the winds carried it way past that area and then came down into West Altadena. And then these are two issues that I think also bear further discussion. We may not get to them in depth tonight, but homeowners, as tough as it was for homeowners, renters also were affected, and they got far less attention and adequate help. And that is something we need to be doing a much better job of. Another thing that's corollary to that is a lot of renters really struggled to get their homes remediated. And there was a lot of confusion as whose responsibility is it? Is it the landlord? Is it the tenant? And what constitutes adequate remediation? I think it took us a while. And then air quality, right? The contamination, we were utterly unprepared for dealing with levels of lead, levels of arsenic, levels of asbestos in the air. And that was embarrassing for our health department because we have one of the 3 health departments in the state, but we just had no expertise, training, or resources to get there. And clearly the county or the city or both are going to need that in the future. And finally, this was alluded to a little bit. We have our students, and we lost, I think, 3 schools in Altadena, 3 public schools, a number of private schools, and the impact on kids of having to suddenly be in Rancho Cucamonga or in Lakewood, and commuting back to school, or starting in a new school, or losing your friends, your best friend has suddenly moved away. The impact on our schools was really profound. So I'm gonna, Joy, you're leaning forward. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I mean, I guess just out of all of those, the schools has been a huge issue in our community. And then specifically on the tenants, I think that's such a difficult issue. The Eaton fire, you know, we all know it destroyed 6,000 homes. It poisoned probably another 6,000. But one thing I think that we haven't talked about much is that it really decimated affordable housing in the area. Altadena was one of the few areas in LA County that it was relatively affordable to live in. And the rents before the fire, the average rent was $1,782, if you can believe it. And a lot of that is more than, you know, you have the formal rents, which is when you sign a lease. But then there are all these people that we call tenants, who, you know, that's a broader population that includes renters, but also a lot of informal living arrangements. People checking up with their relatives or just paying utilities, and all of that's gone now. And so rents have almost tripled as a result of the fire. And that is a rent shock that people will be paying for the rest of their lives. And so I think that that impact on tenants is, you know, is permanent. For those of us who are homeowners, you know, you can remediate, you get back home, if you can, you know, rebuild, then you're back at home. But for the tenants, that tripling of rent is something that they'll have to deal with forever, and that's just, it's been truly devastating.
And a lot of those so-called single-family homes were not occupied by owners, but by renters. So I want our panelists to think about final thoughts. But in the meantime, we're going to, again, you can ask a question or make a comment. All I ask is keep it brief, and I'm not going to surrender the microphone.
Hi, my name is Ben James. I lived up on Athens in Lake. I'm also a social worker, and I wanted to address what you said about communities coming together. I think it's really critically important that we recognize that this all came off the heels of COVID, which dramatically impacted everyone's mental health, right? And everyone's ability to feel safe in public. The idea of getting community back together is so much more of a significant battle than throwing an ice cream social, right? Like there's really significant things that need to be addressed and recognized in that process, but I agree with it and it needs to happen. And Altadena really was like the perfect environment for that to become a reality. So I wanted everybody to be kind of like aware of that your hesitation or your, you know, inability to kind of foresee that community coming together, there's a reason for that, you know, and we should address that and recognize it for what it is.
Well said. Thank you very much.
I heard reference to a communication system that the city used, and in passing, it sounded like everything went well. I'm not sure that was true. Can somebody describe from the city, describe what the system is and what the responsibility of the homeowner is in terms of being connected to something, whatever it is?
Great question.
Just one final thing was, we were in an area that was not directly affected, but it kept changing, whether you were evacuated area or whether you were a standby area. Who made those decisions and how were they supposed to be communicated?
One of the challenges is that the border between Pasadena and Altadena makes no sense, right? It's Pasadena gobbled up little pieces of Altadena over the years and then stopped. And so the border is not clean. And in fact, I spent a whole evening trying to talk the sheriffs into staying on their side of the border because they were keeping people from returning to their homes in Pasadena, even though Pasadena was not under orders for evacuation at that point. So there was some confusion. Christian, what you mentioned, there's several ways
Sure.
in which people can be hooked up.
Sure, what I'll do is I'll send you the link. It's on the city website. There's two that I know of for sure. One is Nixle and one is Please. They're both online forms that you can fill out. that'll send you a text message if something's in your area. Now we know that text is a form of technology that not everyone has access to. So we have some other ways to go about it, and another one would be reverse 911. And reverse 911 is set up based on your Pasadena and water and power phone number that's associated with that, because that is also associated with an address. So reverse 911 also has the ability to be deployed. And then the fourth would be door knocking, and that is all of those are used. And when I mean door knocking, I mean I'm knocking on your door telling you it is time to go. And that occurs. And that occurs by the fire department, and it also occurs through the police department. The police department is technically the one that's going to be handling evacuations, while the fire department would be trying to mitigate the emergency of the fire. So we would be working in unified command. That's when our incident commanders work together to determine where the fire is going and how we're going to move and evacuate. Now, this is a little bit of a unique incident, and I hope I'm not taking up too much time. This wasn't a wildfire. This was a firestorm. We had 60 to 80 mile an hour winds sustained with gusts over 100 miles an hour. Now, I've lived in this community my whole life, and I've only seen that one other time, and it was in 2011, and it wasn't as bad, and we didn't have a massive fire started underneath the power line. And I say that because I'm emotionally connected to this. I've lost lots of homes with friends. I've delivered food to people's homes, and I'm affected. I had to send my family home while I went in to fight the fire because we were evacuated. And I say these things because I don't know how we solve this in the future when we have 100-mile-an-hour winds. That's a problem. It doesn't matter what city you're in when that occurs, but it's going to be a real problem if it happens again. And that's why I say it's important. If you have a neighbor that's a handicap or not mobile, maybe you knock on their door and you know who they are, and find out how you can help them. And also, maybe if you are that person, ask for help. If you live next door to me, I'm going to help you. And I know that's a hard thing to do, but that's kind of where this all starts. It starts community. So Nick's Old Please, it's on our website. I'll be happy to send it to you. But also community. So
In the back? Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, we did surrender the microphone.
I have so much to say, I'll try to be concise. So I want to start with my name is Gail and I am a renter in District 2. And so so thank you for mentioning finally renters. I was like really getting upset that renters were not being, mentioned. It's huge. It's huge. And I am part of a new group now that we call Fire Renters Coalition. That we finally started because there were so many renters on social media that have been in despair. And there's a lot of focus on homeowners, understandably, but renters are really lost and they're not in the conversations. And there is an issue with being torn in this crazy situation between being dependent on landlords and needing the city to step up to enforce landlords, and if the city doesn't know what they're doing. And some people have renters insurance, some people don't, and even if you do have renters insurance, you can't really do anything until the landlord, the testing, but the landlord doesn't do all the testing because they're having issues with their insurances. And so it's this craziness, and even there are those that also lost their homes, and they have nothing. I spoke with one mother that I met with two girls, a single mother, and she lost her home of over 30 years that she was renting. So that she was rooted in that home. But as a renter, if your rental is lost, there's no protection. She had to start from zero. No home, no belongings. She lives with her 2 daughters in a home with 13 other people. Because she has to start from nothing. So there are many more in that situation. There are many people living in their homes which are highly contaminated. My home, which is in District 2, has high levels of lithium, high levels of mercury, high levels of chromium, etc., etc. So that is why we haven't been back home. I also have a minor child and another child, but we're not going home because of that. We've been paying rent throughout this whole year to my landlord. So more needs to be done. Renters need help, and we also haven't had access to a lot of the financial. Distributions that have been happening because there was with homeowners. So there have been so many places that I wrote them emails and said, look, I'm a renter, but my landlord's not doing anything.
Thank you for underscoring that. You've raised a number of challenges we won't be able to resolve tonight, but I think you've raised a number of issues that we have to resolve. Let me just ask, how many here are renters? How many here are homeowners? Okay, believe it or not, in District 2 and in Pasadena, the majority of people in our community are renters.
Wow.
That is true. When I was growing up, it was 60% homeowner, 40% renter. It is now almost exactly the opposite, like 59% renter and 40% homeowner. We have not yet internalized that in our politics, in our neighborhoods. We've not yet realized that we're no longer a majority homeowner community, and that the majority of folks actually are more vulnerable. And of course, we're not going to talk about rent control tonight, but that is a controversial issue in our community that we're still working out. Or it's very much a controversy in the political world, but figuring out how to adjust our community. Mr. Madison did not support the Venture H, but has said it's the will of the people. And so we've been working very hard over the last 3 years to make sense of Measure H and make it work. And there's still lots of issues to be sorted out.
We are good. I didn't support Measure H and I didn't oppose Measure H. I really thought that people should decide, and as you said, when they did, some of us have been faithful, and I count you strongly in that camp of enforcing people's will. There was just a court decision that walked back some of that measure, which is unfortunate. I would say tonight, certainly none of my comments have I meant to distinguish between any resident, whether the renter or a homeowner, and I apologize if you took my comments that way. But you are also right that there's an added element of uncertainty and anxiety when you don't control the home if you're living in a catastrophic event, and we need to do a better job.
I want to have.
I just want everyone to have an understanding that the county launched the support, the renter support, and it is baloney. You have to be on the edge of eviction, and you have to go to your brand new landlord and say, hey, can you fill out all this paperwork and can you get money for me? As victims and new tenants, how's that gonna land? How's it gonna making us feel safe in our new homes? It's outrageous.
Hey, Rick, if I could also, I wanted to just mention, and this is self-serving, Rick introduced me as a lawyer, but when Shakespeare said, let's kill all the lawyers, if you read the play, actually, what it was a predicate to then complete anarchy and chaos taking over an orderly society. The lawyers are the ones who protect us, insurance companies, the utility, and with renters. So there's my plug for my profession that lawyers are sure come in handy when we need them.
Thank you, and I'm passionate about this issue as well as a renter. I'm actually gonna speak on another issue that I'm also passionate about. Councilmember Madison, thank you for not scapegoating the plants and what was a devastating urban wildfire interface. And what I want to ask this panel, two of you are on the council, is given that the city of LA and Glendale have both taken action to maintain local control in the face of very ecologically and financially costly zone zero regulations, what is Pasadena going to do to ensure that we maintain local control, what is right for our environment? A one-size-fits-all policy for the same across a very ecologically diverse state makes no sense. We have lots of scientists and fire scientists saying that. So I'm curious, what our local government will do to ensure we follow not the lobbyists, but the actual independent peer review science.
You want to tackle?
I don't think it's come before us yet, so I'm not well prepared to
You just took it off the legislative committee. It has, because
Okay,
of the Brown Act, you have to redo it on the public safety committee, and it has to go to council, and I am disappointed in the two of you that you haven't gotten this agenda. There's been a letter from the EAC, there have been a number of letters from her. You two are responsible for agendizing this. I've emailed both of you guys, never.
that's the chair of our environmental advisory commission, and we do have a defect. Our commissions, when they send us letters, they don't go on the agenda. They sometimes end up in the ground file. We don't set the agenda, the mayor sets the agenda. We have the ability to force things on the agenda, and we have been reluctant to do that. I think that reluctance is actually waning. Mr. Madison, I think, is going to push something on the agenda on this coming Monday that has not been on the agenda, which is safe parking. So I hear you, and it has not come before us. We will obviously look to the expertise of our residents, our commissioners, and our fire department to sort this out. Okay, so final thoughts about how we make sure that we don't lose the lessons, that we capitalize on some of these issues that need to be addressed, from zone 0 to renter protections to testing for lithium and arsenic, and how we help our residents deal with the statewide insurance crisis, both how it affects them now and how it will affect them in the future. What are some final thoughts? Recognizing we're not going to solve all the world's problems tonight, but that we can commit together to work on these problems to make sure that the next time we have a catastrophe, we're better prepared, not only to deal with the catastrophe, but also to help people recover in the aftermath. Can we start with you, Steve?
Well, for me, I think it would be to support the efforts that we take to reinforce our public safety departments and fire department, get a training center, get a permanent headquarters, continue to support public safety. I believe with all that's going on, most residents, probably those, 95% and more that aren't here tonight, across the city, they look to the city for safety first. And so should the city council. And so we'll keep you informed. We're happy to facilitate more conversation and bridge building with neighbors, or associations, and even neighborhoods. But first and foremost, it's our job at the city to make sure that we're prepared for catastrophes, and we will be.
I think that I would say that the support generally comes from all of you for what I do. But I would say that the things that become either mundane or annoying, like when we do say that it's a red flag warning, and you look at the street sign and you go, should I park on the street or not? And then the issue happens. And I don't know if you guys know what that means, but when there's a certain temperature and wind direction and relative humidity, I believe it's winds over 20 mile an hour, relative humidity less than 15. And the temperature actually can be variable now, because we had some of the driest temperatures in the history of my time here on the department and within the city during the heat incident. And that was not a hot day at all. And so dryness can dictate red flag. But so just know that decisions are trying to be made to benefit you. So if something's occurring, it's not to inconvenience you, it's to protect you. So when you're hearing messages from the fire department, that's generally our goal.
My message is that if year one of this recovery has been a K-shaped recovery, and year two, we really need to work together as a community to change that shape of that recovery. And in addition to the longer term goals of getting these billions that are owed, we have a very short term proposal, which is a coalition urgent housing proposal. And it's especially targeting tenants because, there are many people who don't have insurance. And most of us are underinsured, for those of us who do have insurance. And so we've called upon Edison to advance up to $200,000 per displaced household, which will be in advance. They will be fully reimbursed from the state wildfire fund. So the problem is that it's up to us to cover the cash flow gap until we can get home. But who should cover that cash flow gap until we can get home from this fire? The company that caused the fire. And we're not even asking them to pay for advanced housing. We're asking them to advance the housing funds so that they be reimbursed later. We've built a coalition of over 250 nonprofits. And that includes the California Community Foundation, Altadena Town Council, us, obviously, Eden Fire Survivors Network. And so we invite all of you to sign on to that. And we invite all of you to follow us if you're interested, but specifically to sign on to the Edison Urgent Housing Proposal. And you can find that at edisonrelief.org. Thank you. And you'll also get updates on that. I do think that, I do hope that we put special care on caring for the tenants in our community.
Thank you to all of you online and here in person for participating tonight. I appreciate it. As many of you know, I knocked on a lot of doors during my campaign 2 years ago. And what I found universally, including knocking on some of your doors, is that people in our community, whether they're renters, whether they're homeowners, whether they've lived here for decades or are new to the community, they are deeply caring and very thoughtful and abysmally ignorant about their local government. And that's, I say that not as a complaint, part of that is our job. I believe we need to bring government to the people and not wait for the people to show up with the government. But to the extent that you can leave tonight and think about how you can work with us to reach out to your neighbors, to the people that are busy, the people that are taking their kids to soccer practice or to school, the elderly who are shut in and who can't come out in the evenings to these kind of meetings, the folks who don't drive, and think about how we can organize block by block to take care of ourselves, not just in times of catastrophe, but in times when someone is sick. I spoke with a woman today who I knocked on her door a couple times during the campaign. Absolutely lovely human being who has kind of appointed herself the block captain of her street. And she says, I don't come to your forums, Rick, because I recently been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I'm taking care of myself. But she was calling on behalf of a neighbor because there's an RV that's been parked down the block for several days and it's been cited and it's still there. And she's very compassionate. She understands that that person is doing their best trying to live out of an RV, but that's not really the place to have, you know, someone living on your block indefinitely. If everybody in District 2 does your best to get to know your neighbors, and you know, whether it's an ice cream social as a start, or whether it's a gathering like this that I can come out to, or Christian can come out to, and we can talk about how to get your neighborhood organized. I think we need to rebuild the network at the ground level to take care of each other, to care about each other, and of course, then we get to know each other in ways that, oh, you're a Republican, oh, you're a Democrat, oh, you're old, oh, you're young, oh, you're a renter, oh, you're a homeowner, oh, you're a landlord. Some of these things that have got us wound up as a country, we can begin to mitigate some of the very sharp divisions in our society, and can begin to treat each other as Americans and as members of the beloved community.
May I just say that I have seen Rick Lowe lead in this city for over 30 years, and I am so touched that he just, you know, has been going around to Ventura, City of LA, City of Santa Monica, and you're right here at home in District 2, continuing what you've been doing, building community one by one in such a compassionate way for so long. So
Well, thank you very much, Joy.
Very much for having. My old friend, I should say my old friend, my longtime friend.
I'm old too.
It's good to see you.
And I will be remiss, not to acknowledge that I'm one of 8. And the 8 of us are, in each in our own way, doing what we can to serve you. And, I'm actually disappointed. Elections are coming up in Pasadena, and the 3 incumbents who I think are doing a really good job. Nobody's stepping forward just to even give them some competition. I'm not, I'm not encouraging people because I'm not happy with them. It's kind of, a commentary, on kind of the state of our democracy, that, it's very difficult for someone to step up and think about serving in office. It's a huge responsibility. I encourage anybody to think about whether it's serving on a commission or organizing your neighborhood or finding yourself organizing a whole community as Joy has. Public service is rewarding as hard as it is, and we desperately need it in these tough times. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you a month from now to talk about our next city manager.